Welcome to Not This, Not That, where we push our boundaries of understanding and perception. I am your host, Reverend Patricia Caginello, and I invite you to join me as we open to the possibility that things may not be exactly as you believe, as you've been told, that there could be more, that in our collective consciousness is the potential for the all. You can find Not This, Not That on sacredstoriesmedia.com and on iTunes and all streaming services on the Sacred Stories podcast. Today, we are beginning a 4-part series with New York Times bestselling author James Redfield to expand our boundaries of understanding on the 12 insights that comprise the Celestine vision. The first 9 insights are from James' bestselling book, The Celestine Prophecy, and the 10th, 11th, and 12th insights from his follow-up books to the series, the 10th Insight, The Secrets of Shambhala, and the 12th Insight. So welcome, James Redfield, to Not This, Not That.
Thank you. Nice to be with you.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. We had a wonderful first interview that kind of really framed the whole Celestine vision. And now it's going to be really great to really be able to dig in with you to each of the insights on this series.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm very excited about what time it is in the world and how many people are pursuing consciousness. And of course, I believe the way we proceed with that, the way that is happening in the world is through some very archetypal insights that we get that actually fires up our inspiration, energy, passageways in our brains. We receive all this intuitive information that makes us more self-confident, able to present ourselves, develop ourselves. It's just, it's a great time.
So when the Celestine Prophecy came out in the early 90s, you said that, at that point we could kind of dip into the consciousness, into the spiritual consciousness. But now in 2020, are you finding that we can sustain it or stay in it longer?
Yeah, what's happening in my view is that we're, we are reaching a different energy level. It's a new time in the world. And primarily that's because there's so many people meditating on the planet. There's never been more meditation, more searching, seeking for our peace inside and a higher consciousness. It's more than ever before in this world. And so, I believe it's a new time. And there's also a generational event happening where there are 3 or 4 generations, really, depending how you name them, that are tuning in to higher consciousness. And they're doing this by asking the larger questions. You've got baby boomers who are retiring out there, and they're realizing they have more time. They're looking for ways to help because they know the world is conflicted in some ways. And that, how can they make a difference? They ask that question. They're asking, what do I really want to do with my life now? And then the children of millennials are passing 30 and even into 38, 39, almost 40. And they're a huge generation. But they're asking the questions you ask at that time of life. You've mastered, you're working, you've learned how to make a living, you've done probably the relationship and even the children thing. But then millennials are asking, okay, I've done that, but what else is there in life? What do I really want to do? I mean, where is my true inspiration for my work in the world? So they're asking those larger questions. And then at the same time, their children, the millennials, older children, what we call the Z generation, I hope they'll rename themselves soon. But this generation is later in high school, all the way into early college, and they're thinking, okay, what do I want to do with my life? Obviously, how do I get educated without taking on so much debt? How do I proceed to find something that really energizes me and actualizes me? So as you see, there's all these generations asking these same higher questions at the same time, which of course brings on a kind of higher consciousness, because people start to get answers that are synchronistic there. So I tell everybody all the time, I mean, this is what we've been waiting for. This is the promise of the Celestine Prophecy beginning to unfold. And you know, I couldn't be more excited about it. We have a new edition of the book, as you know, the Celestine Prophecy, that includes an afterword about staying awake and pursuing this fulfilling kind of alertness, you know, that is the Celestine way. That is the look for synchronicity, the alertness for our destiny seeking to unfold in the world. You know, that's a zone. And so we see that happening already. So I couldn't be more excited about it. And I am now traveling on tour with the Celestine Prophecy, the new edition, just to talk to groups who are asking these questions.
You know, the Celestine Prophecy, and you, James, you know, you have such a strong resonance with people, you know, multiple generations now are really tuning in. And I truly believe that one of the reasons is because it is a message of hope, you know, and I think we're wired, or we're seeking hope, especially in today's world. And your message now says that together we are making a difference, that collectively, with everyone tuning in at the levels that we are, and meditating and really connecting energetically, that it is creating part of this new time. And that's really powerful. That's really powerful for people to know that there is hope, and they have a part in playing, you know, in our world.
Well, thank you. I think that you know, it's something that's monumental that's occurring, and we're I think we finally see some real signs in the kind of how to do it mentality put to assembling this critical mass that the book calls for and talks about. So we're getting very practical in the implementation of this consciousness. And I think, again, as you say, we're wired for it. Our brains are wired for it. Consciousness is contagious. Everyone notices when we acquire a higher consciousness, and especially a Celestine attitude toward other people and the energy between people. So people notice that, and they also are wired to pop into it. And so it's a matter of contagion now. You know, the more we live it out loud, the more people we touch with this consciousness, and the more who want to acquire it come toward us. So, you know, it's going to be a fun time in spite of this, you know, what appears to be a lot of conflict out there in the world, especially politically. You know, it's you know, by staying in this consciousness, we actually are offering alternative to the fear and the, you know, the sense of scarcity that some people have out there in the world, which makes materialism a kind of philosophy. So, well, I'll talk a little bit more about that as we discuss the insights. But the main thing to know is that this is not a war with the dark side. You know, this is us acquiring a consciousness that is a model, and then living it out loud to the degree that people want to join, come from a place of fear and or greed or whatever it might be, come into a place where they can be feel self-actualized.
Yeah. And we have 12 very tangible steps, you know, also called insights, that we're going to discuss, you know. So in addition to talking it in theory and generality, now we're going to get into kind of the nuts and bolts and really give people more information on the tools. And so today we'll do the first 3. And the first one, James, I'm going to ask you to say, really explain kind of more what it is, and then we'll talk about how do people actually use it. So the first insight is titled, or we can call it, Noticing Synchronicity. Can you talk about that, please?
Well, synchronicity is the experience of meaningful coincidences, right? And the material, the sort of secular materialistic world out there, has already proclaimed that, there's nothing going on. Everything happens by chance. There's nothing going on. There's no higher perspective. There's no higher force in the world. But once you are alert for synchronicities, which mean the mysterious coincidences that occur in our lives, what happens is that you open up consciousness. And again, I said there are archetypal pathways already in our brains that fires up. And what's fired up is our inspiration energy. We start to feel, wow, maybe there is something, there's something meant for me to do in this world. Or there's a kind of guiding hand of fate, call it destiny, that we can step into with a kind of flow. So, everybody notices synchronicities. We all can look back at how we maybe landed our first job or started our careers or did that one thing, creative thing that got us momentum and a feeling of self-confidence in life. And we can just ask, well, what happened? Or were those events more mysterious than we think? And most of us can say, wow, if I hadn't gone here, thought to say that to a stranger or whatever, I wouldn't be where I am right now. I wouldn't have my partner. I wouldn't have this job I love or this business I've created. So everybody knows that synchronicities happen, but again, we're stretching out of this limited worldview of materialism. And what happens then is that the whole idea with this is to get into a flow of synchronicity, right? To be able to wake up in the morning and get, find the first synchronicity that answers a question that we've had. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But for what it is, it's that this observation of mysterious coincidences that seem to be helping us in life, getting us further down the road of something our souls seem to want to do. Again, there's not one person listening that hasn't had a major synchronicity in their lives, right? So what then is required to keep a flow of synchronicity? And of course, the answer to that is integrating all the other insights. Because synchronicity is the most observable proof that we are living a spiritual life on this planet. And once you realize that, then you know that there are ways to hype it up. So, and what that means is to have more synchronicity, have a flow of synchronicity. And so that's what we should talk about next, because what happens is as we implement steps to keeping a flow of synchronicity, including all the other insights integrated, what happens is that synchronicity increases. And that's our main barometer of whether we're in this flow or not, is how many synchronicities do we have, and do they last for a long time? In other words, you get into a flow around a certain project and it just keeps going until, what we're envisioning manifests. So, we all get knocked out of that flow, and, we're still at that place where we get into it and then get knocked out of it. The key is, how do we get back? And there's an answer to that.
It's interesting. And I'm gonna ask you your answer in just a second. I just have to make a comment though that what I love about the insights is that the synchronicity is the first one, and it's so fun. It's kind of the thing that makes you want to keep going and digging deeper because you can see how the universe is conspiring almost with you. You know what I mean? So it's brilliant, actually, James, the way it all works, that the first one requires all the rest of them to stay in it, but it's what gets us going to begin with.
That's correct. And it again, it's the measure. It's they as we learn more and open up more of this consciousness. What happens is that the synchronicity, the flow of it lasts longer and longer. All we have to do is when we lose it, figure out what happened and then get back into it as soon as possible.
So, in addition to observing the coincidences, noticing the coincidences, and would you say another way to stay in it is believing it, or what other ways or tips can we stay in the synchronistic flow?
Yeah, well, there's several things that I'll go over, which is something we just have to make part of our habitual life, our habit. Staying in this flow is akin to learning how to ski. The first thing we have to do is notice synchronicity, and that would be, learning to stand up without falling over. And then what do we have to learn? We have to learn to stop, and we have to learn to turn. And so there are many ways that we have to turn consciously to keep these synchronicities going, which I'll explain. So it's a lot like skiing. At the end of this learning curve, we get to jump on the first green and then a blue and really sail forward with our inspired life. So what I'd like to do is just go through a couple of these key reaction changes that I think we understand now keeps us in this flow. And the first one is to explore the synchronicities for their deeper meaning, right? If you go in a shopping mall, for instance, and you notice there's a person that's walking in the door with you, something you should always notice, by the way, who you're sitting by on a plane, who's at the next table when you're at dinner. These are all possible synchronicities, right? That sometimes we don't take advantage of. So what am I getting at? Being bold. Okay, we have to explore these synchronicities. So if we see a person going in the shopping mall, and then we somewhere shopping, and we look across on the other side of the table, we see that same person again. That's notable. Most people would notice that. And then perhaps you go by the food court, and you're sitting at a table there, and you look 2 tables over, and there's that person again. Now, it does us no good to just go back and tell our partner, hey, the oddest thing happened. I saw a person 3 times in the shopping mall. Yeah, that's you were alert for synchronicity, and that was certainly one. But what wasn't done was to explore that synchronicity. So what does one have to do in that circumstance? One has to learn to strike up a conversation with a complete stranger, right? Now, in some places in the world, that's easy. Other places in the world, that's not easy, but regardless of where you live, we have to figure out a way to make a comment, that elevator music they're playing in the mall is driving me crazy, and see what the other person will say, or, what's in common, are you both shopping for blouses or shirts, and and my day to buy a shirt. You can say anything. It's just open up some kind of dialogue, because when you see a person 3 times, and that happens to me all the time, you just have to open up a conversation. Now, if you run over and say, wow, just saw you 3 times, we need to talk, that might be pushing it a little bit, right? Because the person may not know what you're talking about and referring to. And so, but you still have to be bold. Strike up a conversation and see where it leads, because you can bet there's something there. It's just a matter of finding out what it is. People trade their stories. I moved here 2 years ago and got married and I have 3 kids. What about you? They share their life stories. And out of those life stories come a conversation about a similar problem that you might be dealing with. So again, my point is be bold. My grandfather told me once, he says, look, he says, the secret of life is learning to make a fool out of yourself gracefully. All right. So if you approach somebody and they act like you're a stalker or something, just keep a smile on your face and do one other thing. Okay. And this comes from the 8th insight, and that is give energy. Okay. Give energy. We'll eventually talk about this, but essentially the 8th insight is the power that comes if you're consciously giving energy, and there's an old kahuna saying that where attention goes, energy flows. So you just have to be consciously looking for a smile on the other person's face, something, a kind of sense of that there's importance here, and looking for confirmation in the other person. But you get what I mean. That's
Right.
That's the first and foremost way to keep synchronicities going.
Yeah. James, quick question before we move into insight number 2. Can we be a synchronicity for another? Could we be noticing and exploring because maybe we're tuned in and there's something we're going to say or something that will happen for the other person?
Yes. In fact, you just jumped to the 3rd insight. That's it. That also keeps the flow going, because, and we'll get there. The 3rd insight is really about karmic design of the world, and I think we know that now. I think that's clear from all the discussion and all the explorations and all the testimonials. We know exactly how to have good karma in the world. And we'll get there at the 3rd insight.
So we can notice and have synchronicities happen for us, or we can notice and we can be, because we're all connected, right? That's the energy. We can be part of a synchronicity for someone else.
And it's if we want to have good karma, we have to think about, at least half of the time, we think about what's that person going to present to us as a synchronicity, but we also have to check our intuitive intelligence for what's coming up for us to say to them that would be a synchronicity.
Yeah. It's I keep thinking as you're talking of the quote, I think it's an Albert Einstein quote about, you can believe, in life, everything is a miracle or nothing is a miracle. So, I say go with everything as a miracle. And I think the synchronicities, that's what makes me think of it, so notice and explore, as you're saying. I think it's beautiful. So
yes.
The 2nd insight is the world has a spiritual design. James, please tell us what you mean by that.
Well, the 2nd insight is about that for sure, which it's about that probably gets more into the third insight again, the karmic design. But what you said does exactly introduce the second, because the second insight really is a history lesson. And the what that fires up in our brain is a awareness of a longer history that our lives fall into, that can give us clarity about how to pursue our lives. And essentially it's this: the world was different in medieval times. There was no science. There was no organized nations that preserved freedoms of creation and freedoms of spiritual conversation and all those things. It was a battle of these collective entities, and classically the Roman Catholic Church, these kingdoms run by a few elites, and knowing the story of what happened at that point, and that switched us over to a more modern era, is very, very important, because when everybody was controlled by these small entities, we didn't have the ability for self-actualization or pursuing expanded consciousness the way we have now. So what happened, though, is very, very important. In the middle of this, we had an enlightenment, which was a celebration of the individual. And out of that grew more freedom to investigate the world on our own, apart from what any king might say about it, or what the church might say about it. So it was quite a battle, but we broke through to the idea that we were all equally important in the world as individuals. And that was because we have certain rights as a human being, but also that we had a creative urge, all of us, to move the evolution of humanity forward. And so what was celebrated was this sense of progress. And what we essentially did through a consensus is that we invented science. The Greeks had already give us the foundation, but we invented science, which was just nothing more than people going out, thinking, having a theory about how the world really works, and then stating that and having other people debate until a consensus was arrived at. And so what that means is it opened up the conversation of what was real in the world. And through those centuries, then we invigorated this science. And the thing that happened, though, was that science tried to figure out and explain the most sort of the closest phenomena to hand. What caused the weather, what was the earth made of, just very practical, materialistic things. And out of that grew a whole sweeping definition of the material world. In order not to have to do any philosophizing, science just decreed, well, there was no creator, there was no spiritual dimension anymore, because they had to get rid of all the superstitions around that. So the first thing they did was created this view of the world that was very materialistic and very superficial. But that they figured out, in a very concise way, that suddenly gave us this sense that the world was explained and safe enough, and we knew how it worked well enough so we could predict the weather and crops and all that went with that. And this is a long explanation, but my point is, then all of a sudden there started to be other scientists that tried to bring up the fact that, well, what about consciousness itself? What about how did we get on this planet? How did the planets, how are they formed? And so there began an alternative science. I call it the human potential movement, that really dates back to Carl Jung, when he reintroduced spirituality into psychoanalysis. If you remember, Carl Jung was a protege of Freud, which is a very materialistic psychoanalysis. Who are we inside kind of research. But Carl Jung reintroduced the spiritual dimension in that. So all of a sudden we have these scientists, and that's what they were, who struck out to say, okay, well, let's use science to figure out the domain of religion. Let's figure out, well, what's the spiritual nature of this world? And that's what everybody alive today is oriented toward. Okay, whether they know it or not, because we've already sufficiently described the materialistic view of the world and established that stability. And now we're going further to describe the insights, the real consciousness aspects of living in this world. And of course, I would say that I'm a member of that camp. I'm not a mystic coming from nowhere, in a robe with that's not who I am. People know it, I'm looking at, I'm part of the human potential movement that's trying to really define and bring about a consensus, critical mass of understanding of what spirituality is about. Now that history is opens up a kind of challenge to all of us alive. We have to get into that discussion. That's why living materially, for most people who do it, is not inspiring. It's a necessity, right? But it's not. The greater inspiration began with Carl Jung and developed through all the, what you might call the New Age era, and then all of the scientific looks at spirituality, and that's where we are now. So the second insight is really realizing, hey, we're all involved, coming to this planet and doing something that our souls want to do that was already preconceived to make the world better, to make it and to understand it more from a spiritual point of view.
I love the history lesson, and I'm glad that you shared it, because I think it's important that this work is framed in the larger context, and it's not just this new stuff people are talking about, right? Another saying, they keep coming to me when you're talking, James, but it's, that we need to know where we've come from to know where we're going. And I think that is really critical. And I also think it's why when the Celestine Prophecy came out in the early 90s, it spent over two years on the New York Times bestsellers list, because it speaks to the mainstream consciousness in a way that we can understand, and it explains things in a larger context. And so I appreciate it. I appreciate it, and I know that it allows others to dip their toes, deeper into the spiritual conversation.
That's right. And how do we maintain that aha, that revelation that centers our life in making a contribution? Well, we have to fight against the worst of materialism that, is going in the direction of AI, artificial intelligence. Because there are forces in the world, most of them big corporate forces, that really just only think of profits and advantages, who want to build out this idea of human life as just a materialistic accident, and the only way we can seek immortality or even health is to have these material electronic devices instilled in our body. Now, if you haven't ever heard that this movement is underway, this is my wake-up call, because they are quickly trying to create this image of the future where we become transhuman through electronics. And I think people who understand spiritual inspiration and all we get from the spiritual life, that's a challenge. And again, it's not a war. We're not screaming at these people. We're just holding alternative in the fullness of consciousness among more and more people. But there is a certain urgency to build this spiritual mass, which we're trying to see as much as possible here.
There's absolutely an urgency. It's interesting. I think a response to what we're talking about is education, right? It's these conversations, because I believe that the forces that you talk about, they make the technology, they make the AI, they make the materialism so sexy and so integrated that people don't realize, or look and see the potential for the danger. We just launched a course about the rainbow light body, but the first module is about transhumanism and the conversation around that. And it's important, James, that and this conversation today is important because I think people don't know what they don't know. They're not looking for the monster in the closet. They're just going through life, and at some point we're further down the rabbit hole than people realize.
That's right, but it's nothing to go into fear about, because that's what they want. They want to be the solution to fear and anxiety and all the rest. Right. When the only real solution to all that is to live our spiritual consciousness out loud again, and
right,
and to spread the word, just as much as we can. We're trying to do that on CelestineVision.com, which is our site, and so it's just holding up a banner, against this. Whenever it comes up, people want to have conversations, and young people fall into the, as you say, the glamour of the, having one eye, have super vision because of electronics in there. But they're, those promises are hollow compared to the inspired life of consciousness.
Right. Absolutely. No fear, just, education, conversations, practicing the insights. So number 2 is the world has a spiritual design. And Thank you for sharing that. And number 3, I'm so excited to talk about number 3, giving, which we call the Karmic Design. And if you can just speak a little bit more about the idea of the Karmic Design as well, because I think that is another area that people, they get a lot of information around, but maybe not a lot of clarity around it.
Yes. Well, as this science of consciousness progresses, all the information from the East, Eastern philosophy, Eastern religion, always points out and reminds us of karma. And it's very interesting, because if you just take a survey, I've seen these, where you ask how many people believe in karma, the numbers are huge. I mean, huge. And when I ask, to an audience, I ask them about what they think of karma. The words I hear back are usually, "Oh yeah, there's karma. We've seen it all our lives. What goes around comes around." People who act selfishly get hit by selfish people. So what we've, I believe, truly arrived at a consensus at is that karma revolves around the whole idea of giving. Okay, not from the idea of individual packets of something that you wrap up in a bow and give, but giving in the sense of helping people, especially as it happens spontaneously during the course of our lives. So the main core karmic structure revolves around remembering to give as much as you receive. And again, in this world of materialism, it's a dog-eat-dog world, right? You got to force your way into whatever you get in life. And if you cut corners, well, that's understandable because the world is meaningless, right? That's the materialistic motto. But spiritual consciousness is discovering that that's not the primary thing. What's primary is the act of helping, of giving. Now, here's the way it works, I believe. If we're a giver, what happens is that we are noticing how we can be of service at any one moment or to give. And if we do that, the majority of the time, and if we don't take, and taking is all kinds of forms, right? You can get in a control drama, which we'll talk about, where you energetically you take energy from people because you feel short inside. Okay, that's bad karma. So that's why we should get rid of those. It's also the basic survival life, and none of us want that anymore. So a taker in any form, if you're trying to sell somebody something they don't need, if you're trying to sell a political stance that is flawed, if you're trying to manipulate in any way, trying to manipulate somebody, even if you think it's for their own good, then it's bad karma. And you aren't giving at sufficient amounts. So in other words, if you're a giver, though, something quite miraculous happens. And by the way, this is, if you wanted to point at one thing that holds humanity back, this is it. We're only now truly understanding the power of alignment with karma. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that mostly 99% of the humans, while all of us are good, even loving, want the best for our children and everybody else's children, there are places where we still take. So I really think it's only now that we're understanding how to enter into what will prove to be, and many people have already proved it to be, a very miraculously designed life, designed universe that we're living in. And so, here's how that works. If you're a giver, then you draw other givers into your life, okay? Which means more people show up just on time for a synchronicity you've been waiting for to happen, right? They are bringing it to you, and when you're giving enough, it's much more easier to find that flow of synchronicity because lots of people are coming in to act toward you just the way you act toward others. It's do unto others. It's in the Bible for a reason. And the rest of that, by the way, is, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The rest of what ought to be on there is because that's exactly the way they're going to do unto you. That's the great revelation about karma, I believe. So here we are, and we we know that's how it works, and we're understanding how the reverse is working. What if you're a taker? If you're a taker, you draw into your life people that act just like you, right? It's very similar in the way they take. If you're a taker, like in the stock market or someplace like that, they'll arrive there to take from you in exactly the same way. And that's because bad karma is not a punishment. It's to bring people into your life that will display to you exactly the way that, or anybody, the way that we're acting to others. And therefore, it's not a punishment. It's just a helpful hint. The problem is, we keep getting reminders, and we think, well, everybody's mean, or whatever it might be, and we don't get it. But I think we're getting it now, which is, watch for the synchronicities that are showing you ways in which you are taking. But the whole momentum is to get on the giving side of life. Now, I'll say a little bit more about this because it's important. I believe right now there is a separation happening where the givers are separating from the takers. And so running side by side, there's a world of givers that is manifesting, and there's a world of takers that are getting worse. Now, that getting worse among the takers is so that the people there will see that this is no fun in this world, and come over to the light side. But there is a separation happening, and if you just watch, figure out who's on the dark side, and it's this materialistic, usually corporate manipulation of people's minds out there, and they are doing it as though they've forgotten how to cover it up. And you can see it in politics, and it's strange because the labels are all wrong now. You just have to go about, well, who seems to be lying the most, manipulating the most? That's the dark side politically. Who's for freedom of expression, freedom of spirituality, and more open creations without being restrained so much? That's the light side. And we have to forget labels and just understand it's our job is to stay on this light side, because again, it's getting bigger. The other one is getting worse and smaller. In offering a helping hand to the other side only takes living out loud, and people come across the bridge to consciousness.
Again, a message of hope, right? That the light side is getting bigger. James, just a quick question for the people who are within personal relationships, because I know that we can talk on the larger consciousness level, but there's so many people, I believe, who are listening who will say, I'm a giver, I give all the time, and people take advantage of me, or they're in relationships that the power dynamic is unhealthy, and they're being taken advantage of. So from a consciousness perspective, what can they hold, or how can they think about the third insight in a way that doesn't that allows them to really be in their power of giving?
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's the next insight, which we will handle next time. But it is, there's so many of us that we give, but if there's any hint of giving to get, giving to get energy, or giving to, get out of an emotion that's hitting you, or giving to to have a goal met, a goal that is really kind of a manipulation, right? That if you're thinking of anything you think about that you get out of it. And remember, to give, we really have to give energy first and foremost. And so that cures all that. That cures any muddy ground about how we give. We're starting to talk about the Enneagram a lot because it really sheds light on that, the problem with feeling needy and wanting more energy from people and thinking they're letting us down. All that belongs to a kind of taking, and it's just an open door to realize that giving of energy is what keeps us in this place of higher inspiration. And so giving energy should be first and foremost. And that cures everything about any of that. Any kind of unconscious manipulation falls away as long as it's all you're thinking about is first giving energy, where you are looking for the higher consciousness on the face of the other person, not their angry eyebrows or their stare or anything like that. But look at that, expecting that to turn into higher consciousness, the expression of higher consciousness, and everybody knows what that looks like. That's the real giving of energy. And the thing about that, the thing that's so magical about that, is that the energy you're giving comes up into us first, right? And then out to the other person. So the way to stay full of energy, give it away every time, every conversation, every time you smile at somebody on the street. Visualize the expression of receiving that energy, looking like the eyes of consciousness out there. It sounds mystical, but hey, we're realizing how mystical life is.
Right. Oh, mystical, magical, and really fun. And you just dipped into the eighth insight as well, which we'll be getting to. So, and what I love about this is that it does seem like I keep moving into the next insight, but they're so integrated and they flow. There is that flow among all of them that it's hard not to touch the next one when you're talking about one. And so we've just talked about the first three insights of the Celestine vision with James Redfield. Those are noticing synchronicities, the world has a spiritual design, and giving as a karmic design. And next episode, we're going to talk about insights 4 through 6, which are human control dramas, which James just alluded to, the spiritual connection, and sensing a life mission. James Redfield, this has been just so fun, and so much came out of, there's so much in what you're sharing. There's a depth of knowledge, just a knowing. I think that's probably the better way to say it. When you explain things, you explain them in a way, and the insights point to a way that is innate. It's innate within us. We all have this ability. It's not something that's out there that that's unattainable. It is the essence of who we are and why we're here. Would you agree?
That's right. And the interesting thing about these insights is the last one, the 12th, is the insight of integration, which is it integrates. We integrate all these. We hear them, we sense them, we feel them. But at the last point of opening up fully in this consciousness and sustaining that, what happens is that we integrate them. So you don't run into a situation and say, now what insight was that I used? You know, we don't have to do that, because when we integrate, we've integrated in a way that changes our reaction patterns. So we change the key reaction patterns, and we are living the insight. And again, we'll talk about that at the level of the 12th insight.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we have been speaking with James Redfield, New York Times bestselling author of the Celestine Prophecy. And we have been speaking about the first 3 insights of the Celestine Prophecy. And this is the first of a 4-part series with James. It's just an absolute delight to do this with you, James. James, any final words for our listeners of this conversation?
Well, I would just say that remember to pursue synchronicity. That's the measure. Pursue, get in, really think about it. And one of the ways to do that is to wake up in the morning. This is part of the integration. I give it to you early. Wake up in the morning, and
that's because you're a giver. See, you're a giver.
Right. Yeah, I'm trying to build up my karma. Wake up in the morning and think of what are your deepest life questions, or maybe more urgent. Sometimes it's just a problem that needs solving. And by doing that, with setting a question, okay, how am I going to deal with this issue in my life? Or, it may be mission oriented. How can I really find the job that I want, that will really inspire me? And once you ask the question, this universe is programmed to bring you the answer, or a stream of answers that will resolve those issues, or bring forth a kind of understanding that you're needing. It's amazing once you look at life that way, what happens.
Thank you. It's amazing, and it's fun. Would you say your life is fun, James?
Couldn't be having more fun right now. And it's not that I have no problems. Nothing comes up. Things come up all the time, but what we do is we get through those and get back to the flow, and so that's the key.
James Redfield, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
And thank you, our audience, for joining us for this conversation with James Redfield, author of the Celestine Prophecy. Please go to James's website, celestinevision.com, for more information on all of his work. He's out now on his Celestine Prophecy Inspiration Tour. Again, we've spoken about the first 3 of the 12 insights from James's work. And next episode, I invite you to join us, because we will be speaking about insights 4 to 6 from the Celestine Prophecy. I am your host, Reverend Patricia Caginello, and you have been listening to Not This, Not That.